Welcome to the weekly LinkedIn Live Leadership Series, Voices of Leadership. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kathy Eastwood, your host and CEO and founder of E=Y. Each week, we explore the fascinating world of leadership, featuring voices across generations, industries, styles, and experiences. Because there's no right way to be a leader. It's about being authentic and being yourself. So each week we'll meet a leader and understand what drives them. What's their unique leadership style? How do they adapt? Maybe what's some of their tips and tricks? So before we get started, I want to just make sure that we make this as interactive as possible. So if you don't mind sharing where you're coming from, be definitely ask us questions. We'll look at the chat and answer them as we go along. But I'm going to ask all of you a question. If you're going to go to the water somewhere for a little bit of a break, do you prefer the beach, a lake, or a pool? So definitely please share that, and we'll even be asking our guests shortly. So now let me introduce you to our guest today. We have Matt Doremus with us, and I am so excited to have Matt with us. Matt and I worked, and I've known him for over 5 years now. He's someone that has a steady approach to life and business, and I always enjoy chatting about leadership and his journey. Matt is a trailblazer in the technology landscape, known for his innovative leadership and technical acumen. He has over 3 decades of experience as a strategic technology leader, working with high-tech startups. He's also established global companies to architect, develop, and manage large-scale, complex business solutions. He's led diverse global teams of software engineers, data scientists, and solution architects. Matt also has a solid track record of developing teams, improving customer acquisition, retention, satisfaction by translating the voice of the customer into the product strategy, roadmaps, and innovative quality focused solutions. But he's much more than a technology leader. He's a strategic architect, and he's always elevating the way teams connect and perform. And I know personally, he always cares about everyone that he's working with. So Matt, welcome. So excited to have you with us.
Happy to be here with you, Kath.
Thanks. So Matt, I think I'm a nurturing driver. I'm someone that loves to get things done, run to the fire, but I do it by caring for others. And my personal mission is really to inspire and enable. I'd love to hear from you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us, even where you're from, something personal, and describe your leadership style and preferences. What energizes you? Did we lose you, Matt? All right, we lost Matt, and we're going to bring Matt right back in. Here he is.
The challenge of home internet.
Absolutely. And I'll be honest, I'm calling in from a hotel room, so it could be the hotel internet too. So Matt, I don't know how much you heard, but I'd love to hear from you about your leadership style, who you are, where you're located. Give us a little more personal information about yourself.
Absolutely. So I'm based out of the Boston area. I've been in the Boston area pretty much my whole life, but I've had great opportunities. Boston is a great hub to work from, and so I've been very fortunate to be here and to be able to serve people in and around the area as well as globally. My leadership style is an interesting one because I feel like it's more of a combination of different types of leadership styles, because just like children and people, not everybody's the same. And so you can't lead people with a single one size fits all approach. So I would say my style probably balances between what I would say is a servant style as well as a coaching style. And I've coached in the past, having raised a child, it definitely has been something I've enjoyed. But yeah, I would say it's a good combination between those two styles, coaching and servant leadership. And I can go further into detail if you want, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, you mentioned the coaching because you have a son, and so did you actually coach some of the sports then? And does it tie into the professional world?
Yeah, I think it definitely does. So had a great opportunity to coach my son in basketball. I'm more observed in other sports, but I love basketball and coached him for a number of years. And the difference with basketball and with any sport is that people react differently. Some coaches will get right up in an athlete's face and be yelling and kind of motivating with a more harsher form of engagement. Whereas other athletes just learn by being told, and some need more encouragement and motivation or direction. And so I think when you have a diverse group of even young kids who are finding out who they are, you can't come at it with a single approach, because you get more by trying to figure out what best suits each individual, whether they're an athlete or a colleague or a team member. You have to understand who that person is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't have any kids, but I've played sports my entire career, right? And, it really is, everyone's different on the court. And it's the same thing in the workplace, right?
Mm-hmm.
People show up with different experiences, different preferences and energies. And, as a leader, you have to figure all of that out.
Yeah.
So, you know, in the workplace, how do you go about that? When you have a new team or new people joining.
Yeah, it's hard. I think as a leader, I think one of my experience has been is that when it comes to developing a vision, first you have to have a vision, and you have to kind of cast that vision, and almost like being a parent, you have to reiterate things that may seem obvious, and so you've got to perpetuate the vision so that everybody understands where we're going and what we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing. And then once you've got the vision figured out, you've got to help people and empower them to help deliver on their part of that vision. And everybody does different roles. You've got some who are engineers and some who are data scientists, or some who are, QA and quality. And not everybody contributes in the same fashion, and therefore they can't be treated in the same fashion to some extent, right? So, that's the hard part, is everybody is different. And so my approach is to try and figure out how people learn, how they work. Some people wait for motivation to hit them. And as my dad always used to say, motivation is byproduct, not a catalyst. And so sometimes you have to step ahead and get people engaged in a way where the motivation comes to them, where they say, I'm so excited about this vision now, I'm going to work evenings, I'm going to try and get my piece done to the best of my ability. And then I think from a leadership perspective, when I find team members that are struggling, I think my approach is to be more introspective. Have I given that person the right direction? Have I given them the right opportunities? Have I empowered them to do and make the right decisions? Oftentimes as a leader, it happens very often that people just take what you say as a definitive direction. And it's very easy to push people in the wrong direction because nobody wants to say no to the leader.
Yep.
So it's kind of confirmation bias, right? They say that's where you get a group of yes people. And I think good leadership is to grow good leaders, not just to get people who comply.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny as you say that, a story is coming back in my mind. I was working at a company. I was fairly new. I was helping and consulting, and I knew the CEO well. And so the two of us talked, and he's like, I really need you to help come in and drive some change quickly. And I said, okay. And I said, okay, we need a drawer statement to give to the team so they know what we're doing. Now, everyone's new to me. They don't know my accent. They don't know. But what I didn't realize is they didn't know what I was saying. And they didn't know what that thing was, that asset that I'd asked for. And so a week goes by, and the level of frustration is growing. And finally, because they're not producing it, I'm like, where's their drawer statement? The CEO's asking, right? We knew what we were talking about. And suddenly someone calls me and finally has the nerve and like, no idea what that is. And I'm like, oh my gosh, well, you got to create a culture, right? Like I thought I was giving clear direction, and being introspective on that, I think is so important. Did you give the right instructions? Did you explain it right? Is it understood by who you're giving to? Yeah, I think that's really great guidance.
Yeah. And I think to add to your point, I think having a culture of support and mutual respect, if people don't feel they're in a safe place to make a mistake, what you're going to find is people who do not collaborate, do not become transparent, and to your point, don't tell you when they don't understand or they're not sure what the objective is, because they're afraid to be punished for that lack of knowledge. So I think building a culture of, yes, we all make mistakes, but we as a team can come together and resolve those things. And that's why the team is here, to support each other as well as to achieve the goal.
Yep. So I was going back through a presentation you and I had co-facilitated a number of years ago, about 5 years ago, on leadership. And one of the things you shared, and I don't even know if you're going to remember this, but how to motivate a team. And you said, make sure they understand the why, empathy, right? That was a big one for you. Listening, being self-aware, and having curiosity. So does that list still apply 5 years later?
I think so. I think I think there's probably a few subtitles I could add to that, but I think those are still the pillars of what I think are important when it comes to teams. So often people don't feel vested in the goal, and therefore they don't bring their best self to the effort. And but I think all of those are definitely still purposeful today.
Yeah, I agree. Now, something else I always remember from when we first met, and we talk about empathy. And you had shared with one of the companies you had worked at, you actually had a way to gather information on how people were showing up and how they were feeling.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about that? Because I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's excellent. I worked at an organization actually here in the Boston area, but we had adopted the lean methodology, and lean, very similar to agile. You have, work cells versus a scrum. You have huddles versus a stand up. Lean is often used in manufacturing environments where you have a huddle board and goals and objectives. But one of the things that we did is built an in-house application. And on that application, it allowed people to pick an emotional emoji that told the team where they were at the moment when they started, when they were coming into that huddle. And that emoji could be anything from a frowny face to a raising my hands over my head, excited. And what that did as a leader is it gave me an opportunity to understand the tone and temper of the team as we came into the meeting. And it gave people a way with nonverbals to express how they were feeling. Oftentimes we can't put into words easily what our emotion is, but we are such a, in our current technical state, we are much more adept of saying, hey, that emoji represents how I feel.
Yeah.
And there may be, 80% of it that's accurate, but other things you can speak around it. And what we found was that was a great way for people to become vulnerable, because oftentimes people did not express their feelings, but they came out in other ways. And it also gave us an opportunity to become empathetic and supportive.
Did you find when you put that in place at first that people were confident to tell you how they were really feeling?
No, I think unfortunately the experience, and this is probably outside of that opportunity, is kind of a general thing. People are very hesitant to be transparent about how they feel in a work environment, which in many ways, if you're not open to hearing how people are and knowing who they are, you lose the opportunity for them to bring their full self to the job.
Yeah. And it's really about building that trust again.
Yeah.
You mentioned that earlier, and, they have to trust that, okay, you're going to use this for good and not say, oh, I'm coming in angry and you're going to tell me that I'm no longer on the project or something. Right.
Right. I've picked the wrong emoji too many times and now I'm in trouble.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
I always love to ask, and you can pick either one or both. Best boss, worst boss, and how did that impact who you are and how you lead today?
Yeah. So I've thought about that, and I'll leave names out, but I do think that the best boss, the characteristics of what I would say were my best bosses, were people who uh, demonstrated trust in my abilities, and not even my abilities at the time, but had in some ways more confidence in my capabilities or my potential capabilities than I even knew I had. Um, and again, that put a lot of pressure on me as an employee to say, "Oh my goodness, they believe that I could do that, and I don't even think I can do that." So it was great, and those were the greatest growth opportunities in my career. So those types of things, confidence. I've always said it's easier to motivate somebody to run through a wall than to try and push them through the wall yourself. Um, and I feel like that kind of engagement or trust or confidence was something that you don't see in every boss. And just lightly on the worst boss situation, I've had a series of characteristics in bosses where uh, they're almost competitive with the people they lead. And what I've learned over the years is that in many times I have to hire people and have people I lead who are much smarter than I am. And many leaders feel they have to be the smartest guy in the room, and that's not the case. As a leader, my responsibility is to take the smart people and help them to get together and do great things.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I use the analogy a lot of times of an orchestra leader,
Yeah,
right? The orchestra leader cannot be the best violinist, right? Or the flautist or the clarinet, so it's about bringing the best together and then
yeah,
orchestrating an amazing piece of music.
yes,
And that's leadership.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And, you, you were talking about confidence. Um, is it that they had your confidence or they were confident leaders in what they were doing?
I think it's a little bit of both because in many ways I was, very nascent or just getting started in my career. Um, but I think if you have a confident leader who you're working for, they're confident enough to take some risk to enable you to do what they need you to do.
Hmm.
And again, that whole laying out the vision, understanding what the approach is, what the goal is, helps me kind of. And the other thing is that they are. One of the other characteristics is that there is a conversation or a continued dialogue with that leader. As a leader, I try to, with my folks, have regular one-on-ones because if somebody gets off track, you don't want to know a week before the delivery that they've misunderstood what the goal is. So a lot of my leadership, and this is part of lean, what they call walkabouts, where you just drop in on people and say, how's it going? What are you working on? Is there anything I can do to help? Having those touch points is so critical for people who are trying to drive things that maybe they're not familiar with. They need that type of reassurance and guidance along the way, not just I've given you a task and I'm going to see you in 3 months.
Matt, have you ever run into the challenge? Because I love that walkabout and drop in and check. Do you ever get a pushback at all if someone's like, you're micromanaging me?
I have, and I think that's not uncommon, and I think the intent is not to micromanage, and I think I always have to check my own perspective, and particularly if you've grown up through an industry or a skill set where you may not be as proficient as you used to be, as we all tend to get less proficient over time, um, but you have some indications of things to avoid or things to address or approaches to take. And that can come across as micromanaging. So I have to really be double checking on my own words, not necessarily my intent. People can't see my intent, but they can definitely see my actions and my words. And so I have to be very careful how I communicate and how I interact so that it doesn't look like I'm in that position of my negative boss attributes, which is, I'm competing with you because I am better than you. It's not that at all. It's really about, I'm just checking in. And if you have nothing to tell me that's concerning, great. But if you tell me that, then I'm assuming that you're on the right track
Yeah.
and that you understand the goals and objectives. But yeah, it is a challenge because people can feel very micromanaged. But that's where empowerment and enablement really are key in leadership.
Yeah, and I'm going to use your word again, trust. And I always
Mm.
say that as leaders, we have to trust, right, and let them do the job. But we also need to verify and make sure that something isn't going out that's not right. But
Yeah,
how do you build trust is continue, verification. But also to your point, and you said it, is you're checking in to see if you can help.
yeah,
Is are you having any challenges? Do you have any obstacles? Right? Because if you don't ask those questions early on, you can end
yeah,
up at the last minute and suddenly you miss the deadline.
yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Yeah. So in your career, you have a very I call it the steady, the measured. I love your approach. And have you worked with people that have a different approach to things, and have you had to deal with adversity on managing people differently?
Yeah, I think, um, because, and I've been in a number of startups, I think the goals in startups are uh, to to jump quickly into a pivot where you either, IPO or you get further investment. And so they're very goal related or achievement related, which is exactly what you want in a business. People, and that's how efficiency is about things and effectiveness is about people, right? So if you are not effective with people and allowing them to do the job, they're not going to be successful. I can take a machine and tune it to be efficient, but people take more time. They have to be taught to be effective, and they have to be managed to be effective. So that's the bigger challenge I see is how you approach people and how you get them engaged in the delivery and goals of your organization.
I love that phrase. So things are more efficient, and then you focus on people to be more effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good reminder for a lot of us.
Yeah, people are not machines, and I think that's, one of the challenges is that when you start treating people as disposable or less than a person, so to speak, that's when you get less out of that person because they know emotionally that they're not being considered in the same vein that, or in the vein that I think they should be. And so it's very easy for that to become an askew to the effort.
Yeah, and I was doing a talk yesterday with a Disrupt HR group, and we were talking about employee engagement, productivity, and this really came up, right? Employees that aren't engaged are really not effective or productive in what they're doing.
Yeah.
And, as leaders, to your point on machines, they're efficient. There's a limited capacity you can ever get a machine to work to.
Mm-hmm.
With people, it's really unbound capabilities that are there because it's all around knowledge and how quickly you can, get that knowledge from person to person and, to drive things. And that's what a leader gets to do, right? Is how do you tap into that potential each one of us has to show up with?
Yeah, and I think as a leader, and at least my approach is, eventually, I will move on to other things, and but I think the legacy of a good leader is that they've developed leaders to take over. And I think that's a great goal of mine is to develop good leaders. So when I'm out of that organization or I've retired at some point in time, I can look back at people who are now taking the helm of leadership and moving things forward.
Yeah. And I love when like people's styles and how they show up stay with you. Like, when I started these lives, I thought of you immediately because we were always talking about leadership and, your approach I always respected and loved. And, you, everybody can elevate their game and learn from each other.
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
um, as we're starting to get to that point of wrapping up already, but what advice do you have for new leaders that are coming in, and how would you suggest they get started?
That's a tough question. I think new leaders, so they don't drop out of the sky like an apple, I hope, right? So normally leaders have been mentored, and they've been developed in some way. There's very few folks who come out of college or university who are, drop right into a leadership role without having to go through some of that being mentored and led on their own. What I would say for new leaders is to find somebody that you think is doing the right things and see if you can engage with them. To me, finding people who you can either read, I've read a bunch of John Maxwell, some leaders on how to develop different levels of leadership, but also finding good people and finding companies where good leadership is a quality and a staple, and getting into those engagements, getting into those organizations. That's going to develop a good leader. And you do it by practice, just like we talked about sports and basketball. You get good development leads to good leadership. And so if you've been developed well, you very well are going to be in a position to be a better leader.
Who is one of your biggest mentors?
From a leadership perspective, I've had a number which have been very good. Um, I don't think I can pick one offhand. I think, there's a lot of sports related leaders, people who have, I think the late Bill Russell, who was a player and then a player coach, people who understood the people that they were leading, but also knew how to lead. And sometimes the hard part of transitioning from being led to being a leader is that sometimes you have to separate yourself from being associated to some or influenced heavily by those you lead, because not every leadership decision is going to be heralded as the greatest thing, right? There's always going to be pushback. And if you are looking to be overly part of the group, sometimes your leadership decisions are not going to be pushing the group to the next level.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a hard thing to transition, but I think that I think Bill Russell was always, as a child, was always one of my great role models for leadership.
Excellent. Yeah. So actually we've got a question here, Matt. So what advice do you give to young leaders stepping into their careers around, you talked about the mentorship. What else should they be doing?
I think one thing they should be doing is becoming more engaged in being relevant in their field of technology or business or whatever it might be. Leadership continues to lead effectively because you're engaged and understand what you're doing. You can't abdicate your responsibility to be. Once you become too disconnected from those you lead, from either a technology or a purpose or value perspective, then you become less effective. So you still have to stay relevant. You don't have to be the expert, but you have to stay relevant.
Yep. And the word that popping to mind for me is curiosity.
Yes, exactly. You got to maintain your curiosity. Otherwise, and that curiosity that you have will spur other people to be curious as well.
Do I remember correctly that you grew up in a very innovative centric household?
I grew up in a very big household. There were 10 children in my family, eight boys and two girls. I started my first company when I was 13 years old,
Yeah.
mowing lawns in my very small neighborhood. And my father was very good. He did not want to give me money for a lawnmower, but he loaned me his lawnmower until I could get enough money to buy my own. And I thought that was great because it wasn't handed to me. I had to earn it. But I think many of my siblings are entrepreneurial, and many of the people that I've had opportunity to meet over the years from business and otherwise are also very entrepreneurial, very idea centric.
Yep. Fantastic. Well, Matt, I can't thank you enough for joining us. I mean, you've really dropped a number of good nuggets with us, and really the importance of getting to know your people, building trust, being a confident leader, coaching to get the best out of everyone. So I really want to thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you to everyone that has joined us here. One of the things that we're actually offering in a couple weeks is a leadership boot camp. And it's funny, it's exactly what you're talking about, Matt, is, understanding what great leadership looks like, building the confidence to be a great leader, knowing yourself, but learning how to speak the language of others and helping them show up how they want to show up, and then really be able to deliver results, which I know in your career, you've done a great job of leading others and delivering results for businesses.
Thank you,
So
Kathy.
if anyone wants to join us, we'll put the link for the leadership bootcamp in the chat. But Matt, thank you again, and hope you have a fantastic weekend.
You as well. Thank you for having me, Kathy.
Thanks. Take care.